Hello, everyone. So my name's Soph. I'm a producer for Crossover Labs. I'm a white person. I have a brown bandana on, a blue shirt, and glasses. The talk I'm going to give to you today is called Feeling Machines, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about what Crossover does within the Immersive Arts program and what we do as an organisation to start off with. So, as Tom said, Crossover run the training and events for Immersive Arts. So we run the development labs for the experiment and expand strands and our annual event that you can see here, which is called The Big Thing, which took place this year in June in Bradford, as well as these inspiration days. So Crossover as an organisation is really interested in the intersection of art, storytelling and technology. So wherever those three things cross over, that's where you'll find us. And what we do can be broadly split into these three strands. So curation, we curate selections of immersive work for film festivals or for large public audiences like Adelaide Fringe in Australia, where we curate our own festival of immersive storytelling called Electric Dreams. And it's also sort of an investigation into routes to market for immersive projects. We run labs. So these could be creative spaces for artists to explore immersive in their practice or professional development programs to hone project ideas for market or all the way through to realization. And this image is from a lab that we ran with the BFI called Immersive Fictions, and that was to develop immersive projects that were utilizing comedy. And then finally, productions. So we work with an international slate of artists and technologists to create and develop our own work. And this image that you can see here was taken from Karen Palmer's interactive film Consensus Gentium. And that's an experience for iPhone set in a dystopian near future that uses the front-facing camera to track and react to your eye gaze and branch the narrative. So this talk is called Feeling Machines, and hopefully, as the name suggests, I'm going to be focusing on the feeling, the experiential side of immersive art. How is it that artists are using technology to actively involve their audience? This talk will be a lot of examples and information and ideas. If I say something that you don't understand, please do stop me and ask. I should have said at the beginning, this is also a relaxed environment. If you need to get up and leave, go to the quiet space, please feel free to do so. But my aim with this talk is to give you as many potential in points as possible to get you excited about experimenting with immersive technologies in your practice, and at the very least, I'll put you onto some interesting projects and artists. So the talk is roughly broken into three parts. So firstly, we'll be looking at the elements of immersive art, demystifying that term a little bit by breaking it down and building up some shared language. Then we'll explore how artists are using immersive technologies to meet the political, social, and cultural moment we're currently in. And finally, thinking about what engaging with immersive art could mean for you as hopefully you go on to apply for the fund. So the phrase feeling machines comes from this quote from neuroscientist Antonio Damasio. And he says, "We are not thinking machines that feel, we are feeling machines that think." And when I was thinking about this talk and what I wanted my sort of North Star to be, I kept coming back to this quote because I think it sort of sums up why I'm here talking to you. I feel, as I know many people in this space do, like I sort of fell into this space. I don't have a background in digital art or technology, but what I came here with was a love and a curiosity for creativity and art of all forms that connects people, that creates intimacy and moments of tenderness and togetherness. And I think art that makes us think about how we relate to each other is vital for the climate that we find ourselves in. And this image that you can see behind the quote is from a piece called Channel, which is a deep listening experience, live scored by ambient electronic music. And at the start of this piece, the audience are invited into the space to sit or lie down. And there's microphones on either side. So you can sit sort of like in the sound bath experience, or you're invited to, if you feel called, to go to one of the microphones and you can make a sound or a noise, and that will be weaved into the electronic landscape. So you can see the person lying on the floor here is definitely feeling it. So just to kind of repeat what Tom said, there is no one definition of immersive art, but immersive art is an art form that is about presence, sensation, emotion. It's art that makes us interact with each other, placing the audience at the center. And artists working with technology are using these tools not just to show us something, but to make us feel something. But I'm sure you're all aware that the word immersive gets thrown around a lot. So this is what we mean as an organization by immersive art. Art that uses technology to actively involve the audience, bridges physical and digital spaces, engages multiple senses, and connects people to each other and their environment. We're both interested in how artists are using technologies as creative and expressive materials and work that engages with the challenging cultural, political, and societal implications of working with these tools. So now we have our purposefully broad definition of what we mean by immersive art. I want to break it down into elements, the component parts that often make up a piece of immersive art. And this is by no means exhaustive, but my aim with this is to create some shared language, which I think is a really important tool to have when you're entering an unfamiliar space. And the more people who have the language to engage with this work critically, the stronger critical mass around the art form will be. So it's helpful for everyone. So we'll start with technology. This is We Live in an Ocean of Air by Marshmallow Laser Feast, and it's a virtual reality experience about breath and its connection to the world around us. So it's a virtual reality experience. Participants are wearing a headset and they're completely immersed in a virtual world where they're free to roam around the room, and their movements are tracked and they're visible to other users within the experience. The piece also uses breath sensors and heart rate monitors to generate responsive visuals, immersing participants in a world that goes beyond human perception. So this might be the kind of work you might imagine when we think about technology-driven immersive art, something that's fully kitted out, high-tech, multi-sensory. But what about this? So this is temping. This is an immersive theatre show for one audience member at a time, where for an hour you are working as the temp, filling in for Sarah Jane while she's on vacation. And as you perform your tasks, your real tasks as a temp, a play unfolds for you through an Excel spreadsheet, emails, a printer, and a phone. So the team that made this call this a first-person spreadsheeter. So hopefully with those two examples, I've sort of shown you the breadth that technology, what we mean by technology in this space. It can be super, super high tech, can be sort of low tech technology that we're more familiar with. And this is true for space. Like other forms of art, we need a space, a theatre, a gallery, a stage. But when we're working with technology and digital art, we can expand what we mean by space. So this is a project called The Founders Pillars, and it's a site-responsive augmented reality work. And when we say augmented reality, we mean overlaying digital effects onto the real world. And the site that this piece is responding to is the New York Stock Exchange. So what would happen is you would stand in front of the building, and using an augmented reality app on your phone, you'd hold it up and you would see this building with its colonial legacy transformed into a dynamic and shifting monument that honors the African diaspora. So the Founders Pillars is decolonizing and reimagining historical buildings. But what about spaces that don't exist yet? This is Pollinator Pathmaker, which asks, if pollinators design gardens, what would humans see? And this is based on research of how pollinators sense and look for food. So Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg created an AI algorithm to think about this question. And you can use this algorithm for yourself. If you go to that link on the slides, you can generate a one-of-a-kind digital artwork. And if you have a garden of your own, you can put in the location, the size, and the amount of sunlight it gets to create this digital garden. And then it also generates a PDF that you can download, which you can then use it has instructions on how you can plant this garden for yourself. So for Ginsberg, this algorithm was a way to reduce human bias, a way to design spaces and environments with empathy, prioritizing the needs of another species over our own. So when we use these two words, interactivity and participation, we usually use them interchangeably, but they're not quite the same thing. But when we're thinking about them, we're really asking, like, how is the audience being invited to engage with a project? And interactivity is about the system responding to you. So you press a button, you move your body, make a sound, and the artwork changes. And participation is about you taking part in the artwork. That might involve interactivity, but it could also be something simpler. So this is Constantinopoliad by Sister Sylvester and Nada El-Shazli. And this is a really beautiful example of a piece using a tangible and quite delicate object to guide participation. So this is an audio piece where you sit at a table with headphones on, and through the audio, you're guided by the artist's voices and a soundscape through a collective reading of this handmade book. And this book is based on the archive of the poet Cavafy. And the piece is this really intimate and tender exploration of queer love, literature, imagination, and history. And this is a brilliant quote from Sister Sylvester. She says, "My favorite response to this work was an audience member who described it as making love to a stranger through a book." And that's what's really special about this piece, is how you're sharing the book with the person sitting next to you. And the tables that you sat at have light boxes in them. So as you're sort of unfurling these sections of the book, they're being illuminated from underneath to reveal these sort of like hidden drawings and messages. And you're in this sort of unspoken dance with the person next to you, deciding like who's going to do what, while you're like exploring this piece of living archive, essentially. So interactivity could feel like making love to a stranger through a book. It could also be in absolute darkness in a shipping container, participating in a choose your own adventure style narrative. So I know this isn't in complete darkness, this is a press shot, but in the actual experience, you'd be in complete darkness. This is Arcade by Darkfield, and you might have seen some of their experiences before. They all take place inside shipping containers in absolute darkness, using binaural audio to immerse you in surreal narratives. And Arcade is their first sort of foray into using agency. Giving their participants agency. So you're stood in front of an old school arcade machine with a big button for yes, nothing for no, and a coin slot that you're told can be used should you need to purchase anything inside the experience. So when the lights go out, you're stood in front of your machine, you drop into the experience and you're a character called Milk, and you're navigating a violent, absurdist dystopia. And one button, it might not sound like a lot of agency, but when you're in the experience, it feels like a lot of agency. So when I did this experience for the first time, I had ended up following a group of people into a sort of room above a shop, and had encountered some characters that could only say yes. And I could feel the stakes of the situation building a bit, and I was sort of getting overly conscious of my hands on my button. And someone said to me, "Do you want me to cut my fingers off?" And I accidentally pressed yes. And then my shoulders were just like creeping up by my ears as I was just hearing this person like cut their fingers off. So it wasn't a lot of agency, but it was enough. Emotion. So how are we all at identifying our emotions? The researcher Brené Brown is a qualitative researcher who studies courage, vulnerability, and shame. And in her book, Atlas of the Heart, she identified 87 human emotions and experiences. And she wanted to do this because she interviewed almost 7,000 people and she asked them to identify emotions. How many do you think most people could identify? That's a real question. 12? And someone said 10? Very optimistic. So most people could identify only 3: happy, mad, and sad. I know. So I think this is another case for the importance of shared language. It's how we make meaning, and especially if we're making work with audience at the center, I think having the language of the breadth of these emotions is really useful. And you can go to Brene Brown's website and download this PDF for yourself. And I think what is particularly important is, you might not be able to see it, but there's a section up at the top that says the places we go when it's beyond us. And those emotions and experiences, all wonder, confusion, curiosity, interest, and surprise. When I was thinking about emotion, I kept coming back to this experience, this piece by Team Lab. And I think this is one of the best examples of how technology can, even without a narrative as we might understand it, evoke these emotional and transformational responses in an audience. So this is an installation at Team Lab Borderless in Japan, and it's from their Light Sculpture Line series, which all take place in this huge room where the audience is positioned at the entrance and almost just inside a tunnel that's made up of hundreds of LEDs that are moving together to create these sculptures of light. And each LED's brightness, color, and timing is adjusted down to fractions of a second, allowing them to draw these lines of light. And you become completely immersed and just drawn in by these beautiful, vast, shifting sculptures that are just made using light. And this piece, I think, is a really good example of embodiment over intellect, how we feel first and think second. Like, as I was stood in front of these, these shifting lights, I was feeling empathy, awe, curiosity, tension, maybe even a little bit of fear and joy. And that was all with these hundreds of LEDs. So, senses. Immersive art can engage multiple senses to create immersion. And we have the ability using technology to hack our biology, using our senses to deepen our sense of embodiment or awaken our agency during an experience. And these sensorial changes affect emotion, attention, and perception, just as they would do in the real world. So hopefully by now you can see how sight, sound, and touch have been used in some of the previous examples. But what about scent? So this is Famous Deaths by the Dutch collective Polymorph. And this project was a little before my time, so I haven't personally experienced it, but Tom has. So if you're curious about it, you can ask him about it. But in the work, participants relive the final moments of celebrities, and you're placed inside what looks like a morgue drawer, and you're listening to a soundscape while different scents are pumped into the space from these canisters. And the idea was to revisit through scent the final moments of famous figures, people like JFK or Van Gogh. And scent might not be the first thing that you would expect to raise ethical questions in art, but here we are. And if you listen to Tom's talk from last year, you can also hear about how Polymorph went on to incorporate scent as well as taste in a later project called Symbiosis. So when we think about storytelling in immersive art, it doesn't always look like a traditional narrative. Sometimes the story is crafted and we as the audience move through it in a more of a set way. Other times we're given some level of agency, like in Arcade. We decide which path to follow or what characters to engage with, or what order to experience events in. And in some works, the story is created by the audience themselves, built out of our choices, actions, or pieces of ourselves that we choose to share. Like in Ancestors by the Smartphone Orchestra. So Ancestors is an interactive group experience in which the audience are guided by their own smartphones, and through the use of AI face merging, a family tree is created. So at the start of the experience, you take a selfie, And then when the experience begins, a picture of another person will appear on your phone. And you have to find the other person who has this same picture on their phone, because this person has been created using yours and that other audience member's face. So you have to search the room and find who you've created this child with. And once you found that person, a new picture appears and you have to find two more people with the same picture, and so on, until everyone in the experience is one family, the ancestors of a virtual great-great-great-grandchild. And during the experience, the audience are all invited to share about their own families, their own intergenerational relationships. And it's also partly like speculative fiction, because you're being asked to imagine the world in which your great-great-great-grandchild will be living in. So this experience is a really great example of how you can both create a narrative and also a community in real time. So the last element I'm going to talk about is values. What are the values of not only just immersive arts as an organization, but as an art form? And I want to talk about a project that encapsulates accessibility and inclusion, artist and community-led innovation, collaboration, and knowledge sharing. And this is Museum of Austerity, directed by Sasha Wares, and co-produced by the English Touring Theatre, National Theatre UK, and Trial and Error. And Museum of Austerity is a mixed reality experience that tells the stories of disabled people in the UK who died as a result of welfare support cuts during the austerity era. And this experience uses a HoloLens, which is a mixed reality headset that you can see in this image here, and sound design. And Museum of Austerity responds to the embodied presence of a viewer in the physical and mixed reality space. So you will approach each holographic representation of a person who died as a result of the austerity era cuts. And as you approach their figure, this activates the sound of a relative talking about that person's last moments. And as you turn away to leave, there's sort of a bench in the middle of the space that looks like it could be in the House of Commons. So as you turn away from the image of the person and step towards this bench, it triggers comments from politicians in the House of Commons about the law itself, changes to the benefit system, or even the person's death, whose family member that you've just been hearing from. And this juxtaposition, it collapses the distance between political decision-making and the individuals impacted. So due to the nature of the subject matter, a focus of the production was the mental well-being of the production team, the participating families, and the audience. The project's creative team included disabled and non-disabled artists and offers comprehensive, inclusive, and clearly signposted access information for audiences. The access offer includes through experience audio description, in-headset captioning, a BSL onboarding video, wheelchair access, and a range of accessible amplification options for audiences. So Museum of Austerity is a brilliant example of how leaning into the access considerations of the subject matter resulted in innovation in the exhibition of the work. They were able to create an accessible mixed reality work where previously they'd been quite inaccessible. And they also included a bespoke content editing tool where audiences could select not to see certain material. There was also a moment that I noticed when I was doing this experience of there was a place in the room where if you walked over to it, all you heard was music. And it was this really considered attempt at giving people just a chance to have a bit of a break, meaning that they didn't need to leave the room and then come back in. So I think this project demonstrate, and all of the projects that I've spoke about, they demonstrate how immersive art is not just about spectacle. These values of accessibility, inclusion, dealing with incredibly difficult issues in a way that looks after the people involved in making it. These principles are deeply embedded in the art form. And because we're sort of at this sort of really exciting and like bubbling time, Each artist and work produced is helping to define the culture and ethos of the form. So now we have the full picture. We've looked at each of these elements and hopefully created some shared language to describe what we mean by immersive art. And all of these elements are distinct with their own qualities, but none of these elements can exist in a silo when we're making immersive art. They're parts of an ecosystem that are interdependent, and if we take parts away, it undoubtedly affects the whole system. And I think it's interesting that when we're talking about art that is utilizing technology, we're quite often talking about finding a balance, bringing together these components so an audience can engage and be present in a way that feels safe. But what does it mean to be making immersive art when the world we're in can make us feel the opposite? So the British Council earlier this year published a report called Why Technology Needs Artists. And this is a quote from Noura El-Badri's section titled, "Can AI be Emancipatory?" And she says, "I want to write here exclusively about the emancipatory potential of technology, knowing very well that almost all of our experiences of it are exactly the opposite." Art that utilizes technology, it exists in this contradiction. And in this section, I want to explore how artists are sitting in that contradiction and making work that answers to the moment that we're currently living in. So this is Only Expansion by Duncan Speakman, and it's an augmented audio walk which remixes the sounds of the city around you so you can experience sonically how your life might change in the future. So you have this guidebook that you can see here, which gives you prompts to explore the city, but you choose your own route. And the headphones that you're wearing, you're using these custom-built devices by Duncan. And the headphones that you're wearing have microphones in them, so they capture and manipulate the sounds around you. And when I was doing this experience for the first time, I was really struck by how Duncan had created a piece that was about the climate crisis, but what he had created was a piece that conjures the feeling of awe and wonder. It makes you feel so rooted in the place that you're in and embodied. Like this is an audio walk. And when we think about embodiment, you might go back to the Marshmallow Laser Feast piece and think, well, that's an experience that must be really embodied. But just using audio, Duncan has been able to create this experience, which is one of the most embodied I've ever felt when doing a piece of immersive art. And the sounds that you're hearing, they are being manipulated in line with sort of climate change. So you might hear the sound of water. So it's like the sea levels have risen. You might hear what it sounds like if the place that you were in turned into a desert. But it's still this really joyful project that makes you feel really grateful and rooted in your environment. And I think this quote sort of sums up how Only Expansion is dealing with the climate crisis. And I'll read the full quote, which is, "In pursuing justice, we're reinforcing the system we're trying to escape. In trying to climb out of the pits that we've dug for ourselves, the pits become resilient. In trying to escape the prison gains its form. So in a very critical sense, we're in a crisis of form. We need trickster approaches. We need ways of dancing away or dancing to, fugitive spaces, dancing to sanctuaries where we can shapeshift, grieving, mourning, even allowing ourselves to partake in pleasurable activities in the face of the storm." And that's by the poet and philosopher Bayo Akamulafe. And I want to keep thinking about that idea of trickster approaches when I talk about this next project, which is called Turbulent Jamais Vu and is by the Australian artists Ben Joseph Andrews and Emma Roberts. Jamais Vu is a mixed reality piece about the artist Ben's experience living with a chronic condition called vestibular migraine. And vestibular migraine affects his perception of motion and balance. And the first stage is a sense of derealization. So if déjà vu is I've seen this before, jamais vu is I've never seen this before. And he set out with this piece to capture this feeling of your own body as not your own by messing with participants' perception. So he aims to reframe something that he's suffered from to this mode of expanded perception where boundaries between self, things, and the world are porous. And Ben took inspiration from encountering glitches in VR because they were sort of the closest thing to his vestibular migraines, the closest thing that he'd felt that reminded him of his vestibular migraines. And he does this by hacking a camera that is attached to the front of a VR headset. So when you do the experience, you put the headset on, you're sat at a desk that sort of looks like Ben's desk, and you put the headset on, and as you're guided by Ben's voice, and you open your eyes, and the sort of trick of Jamais Vu is they've hacked this camera, this depth sense camera that's on the front of the headset, and they have flipped the camera feed. So what was once your left hand is now your right hand, and what was your right hand is now your left. So this is sort of what it looks like when you're in the experience. And this is what it looks like when you're looking at people inside the experience. So I took this footage on a camcorder, that's why it looks like that, during a work in progress showing of Jamais Vu that was part of a public exhibition Crossover had curated at Silbersal's Science and Media Festival in Halle in Germany. And this was just before the piece premiered at IDFA in 2023. And when I was watching people in the experience, I was really fascinated by how when people were opening their eyes and discovering this sort of trick, they were rediscovering their hands like babies would, with this like wonder and sort of really carefully like manipulating the objects on the desk. And virtual reality that uses a headset, it's long been described as the empathy machine. And I think more and more people are challenging this notion, not because it isn't true, but because we understand that these tools are not inherently one thing. It's what we do with them that creates an impact on our audience. And this is a quote from Glitch Feminism by Legacy Russell, which explores the socio-techno construct of gender and sexuality and the generative potential of glitches. And it's a reworking of Simone de Beauvoir's line, one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. And Legacy says, one is not born, but rather becomes a body. And I think what I was seeing when I was watching people in the experience was them becoming a body, them discovering their body again, but in this expanded form. And this quote is from a manifesto that insists bodies are not fixed biological truths, but processes shaped through culture, technology, and imagination. And for disabled artists in immersive arts, this opens up space to resist ableist notions of body and to instead explore embodiment as fluid, adaptive, generative, redefining what a body can be and do in digital and immersive spaces. The next project I want to talk about is Hook, the Jaguaress by Violeta Ayala. And Violeta is a Bolivian-Australian Quechua filmmaker, artist, and technologist. And Violeta uses AI to directly challenge dominant Western storytelling narratives and methods. And Hook, the Jaguaress, is an interactive installation in the form of a feminist indigenous AI. And it reverses the roles. So here it's Hook, the AI, that questions the human rather than the other way around. So Violeta taught themselves code when they were 42 in 2019, and they've made many projects since then, but Hook premiered at Copenhagen Documentary Film Festival earlier this year. And this was what the installation looked like in Copenhagen. And I am a little bit obsessed with Violeta. I think they're one of the most impactful voices on me that is talking about AI and its use in art. And one of my favorite things about Violeta is hearing them speak. So I'm going to read something from an interview that they did with XR Must after Hook premiered at CPH Docs. Hook is an AI being with memory, with instincts, with story. She's made of multiple AI models working together, not simultaneously, but in a system that allows her to shift across life stages from youth to old age. She sees through a small robotic camera, performs real-time motion capture, and reacts selectively to up to 20 people, choosing who to engage with based on how she perceives them. What she says in the moment is unique, never repeated, small films generated in real time. Sometimes she tells you about her daughter Nina, drawn from the screenplay I gave her. She also uses projection mapping to animate smaller Jaguar figures in the space. She is not a simulation or chatbot though. Hook's a living digital entity, built to remember, to decide, to feel. At the exhibition, everything happens live. Her gaze, her storytelling, her choices. Those who truly understand what they're experiencing are captivated. They come back again and again just to see how she evolves. But most people don't really grasp what Hook is. They don't realize they're interacting with AI, but just see the projection mapping. They take selfies with the visuals, but they don't realize that what's happening is a real-time interaction with an AI being. So what Violetta has done here is sort of take these AI tools built by these white cis men in Silicon Valley and has remade them in their image. And I would encourage you to go and listen to Violetta speak, especially if you're sort of feeling this sort of AI anxiety or are fearful about it, because she is a very galvanizing speaker and wants us to sort of reclaim the future for ourselves. And this is another excerpt from that interview. And they say, "We are living in a technological revolution. That's not a metaphor, it's a reality. And every time a major shift in media happens, people panic. When writing began, we feared the end of memory. When cinema appeared, we ran from the trains on the screen. When Photoshop was invented, we thought truth itself would vanish. And now with AI, the fear has returned. But fear won't help us. What matters is what we choose to do with the technology. It can be used to dominate and enslave, or it can be used to free, protect, and empower. If we understand it, if we train ourselves, we can make it ours. If we don't, we risk being controlled in ways we've never experienced before." So hopefully what I've done at this point is sort of build out this picture of this creative ecosystem of immersive arts. And this is from Elijah. He is a DJ, a lecturer, an artist, a thinker, and he creates these yellow squares that he posts on Instagram. And he's also turned it into a book called Close the App, Make the Ting. And he spoke at the Big Thing in June. And so he says, it's not an ecosystem if everyone is doing the same thing. It's a creative ecosystem when everyone is building different ideas with the same principles. Which brings me to your practice. What does this mean for you? This comic strip was taken from, was created for that British Council report that I mentioned at the start of this section. And it's a comic strip by the artist Danielle Brathwaite-Shirley titled "I Can't Lose My Humanity." I would really encourage all of you to go and read this report. I think it's a really accessible report. There are a lot of different formats, forms inside of it, like interviews, short essays, and this interactive comic strip that Danielle's made. And Danielle's practice as an artist is about archiving Black trans experiences and using technology to imagine places that center trans bodies. Known for working across animation, sound and performance, and video game development, Danielle often creates video games as artworks, immersing the audience in a world and prompting them to reflect on their own identities. So I think these questions, they might be some of the things that you're feeling at this point. Are you scared? Are you excited? What do you see? Are you confused? Are you desperate? These tools have limitless possibilities. What will you use? What will you use the technology for? This technology has limitless possibilities. What will you do with it? So, hopefully what I've done by this point is demonstrate the range of possibilities that immersive technologies can mean for your practice. But you might be sitting there with a lot of ideas or sort of an end goal that you're like holding in your mind, thinking, okay, that's what I want to go towards. And I want to introduce you to this concept that you may already know from evolutionary biology called the adjacent possible. And this was coined by the biologist Stuart Kauffman. And the idea is that any living thing has a limited set of next moves that are available to them. And each move is one step away, but that move will open a door to the next set of adjacent possible moves. So I know how we all know like how sort of if you're holding that ultimate possibility in your head, how that can sort of end up being debilitating instead of motivating because it seems so far away. But I want to imagine in this current state bubble that you can see here, what if you put your practice in there where you are right now, or a question that you're interested in? And then what if you filled out all of these adjacent possible bubbles with things that you could do that are only one step away from where you are right now, but would open up this whole new set of possibilities that could be available to you? Because when you go to those next adjacent possibles, what you will do is you will sort of create these roots that are spreading through this creative ecosystem. Like when we're exploring with technology, it's not a linear process. It's not like walking up a staircase. And I can guarantee with all of those projects that I've shown you, all of those artists, none of them will have been following a roadmap. What they will have been doing is thinking and feeling their way through what they wanted to explore. And then that's where they ended up. But that place that you end up at, you don't even have sort of the vantage point from your current state at the moment. But when you explore these adjacent possibles, you'll find things that you didn't even think were interesting at the beginning. You'll meet people that you didn't know before. And I think it will maybe be a little bit more, instead of being sort of overwhelming the amount of possibility, it might be a bit more sort of inspiring. And I want to leave you with this quote from Rick Rubin. He says, "If you know what you want to do and you do it, that's the work of a craftsman. If you begin with a question and use it to guide an adventure of discovery, that's the work of an artist." Thank you.